What's up, everybody? James Duggan here with IGN, and I'm going to be rewinding the Anthem Our World My Story trailer, which was debuted at PAXWest. This is Fort Tarsis and serves as your narrative hub. There is a ton more to go over in terms of Fort Tarsis, but it comes up quite a bit in this trailer, so let's just keep moving. This trail of objects are a series of Shaper relics, which are unknown and ancient structures that affect the world of Anthem in sometimes cataclysmic ways. An example would be something like this. This is a Shaper storm, and is a great example of the shared world nature of Anthem. The Our World part of the title of this trailer means that things that are happening outside of Fort Tarsis are things that everybody can experience. If there's a Shaper storm in a specific quadrant on my map, it'll be on your map and your friend's map, and we can go explore it together. Shaper storms could also potentially be used to kind of mix up terrain in a post-launch capacity, but that is a story for another day. Here we have 3 Javelins from right to left, the Colossus, the Ranger, and the Interceptor, which is pretty exciting because we have not seen a lot of the Interceptor just yet, but we will as the trailer goes on. Now, before we move on, pay close attention to the color of the Ranger's armor. He's got a black base with golden plating, but in the following shot, it's silver with green plating. While aesthetic customization has been confirmed for a very long time, this, to my knowledge, is the first time we're actually seeing it on the Ranger. The 4 freelancers are jumping off of Fort Tarsis, and this is something very much that happens in real time. At any point, you can decide to launch off the ground, hover, or fly to your heart's content. The only thing that is going to pull you out of the sky is your suit overheating. But that can be combated with 2 techniques which are actually perfectly demonstrated in both of these shots. On the one hand, you can nosedive, and that'll cool you down, or you can fly through a waterfall, which is allowing these pilots to fly straight up for a much longer duration than they would be able to do normally. This glorious, albeit quite short shot, is the first footage from the perspective of an Interceptor, which is that 4th archetype, that 4th class of Javelin. And the Interceptor is very much that agility archetype. And if we take a look at the HUD elements, we can kind of see that conveyed. Now, granted, this HUD is probably not final because we have 3 of the same icon in the various ability slots. However, if we look at the weapon, we can see that this Interceptor Javelin only has 1 weapon equipped, as where all the footage of all the other Javelins that I've seen thus far have had 2 weapons equipped. So I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that the Interceptor might only have 1 weapon slot. In the upper right, we can see the quest objective, which is to locate Matthias. Now, Matthias is an agent, and agents are quest givers in the world of Anthem, but they are also the main characters that make up the cast of your story. Matthias is an agent for the Arcanist faction, which seeks a better understanding of Shaper relics and the Anthem of Creation itself. So accepting a mission from Matthias and the Arcanist faction will generally send you and your party to explore the deep places of the Earth, and therefore encounter giant, ancient monstrosities like this Ash Titan in front of us. Here we see a Colossus with a railgun, which is something you can swap out for a different artifact on that particular hardpoint using his or her shield, which completely absorbs a certain amount of front-facing damage. We also see a Wyvern, which is an enemy we've seen before use a fire attack for the very first time. There's a very brief shot of a Storm Javelin fighting an elite Ursix, which is a giant enemy that we actually saw all the way back in E3 2017. Now, while very formidable, the Ursix may not be completely malicious in the way that some of the more sentient creatures of the world of Anthem, like the Scar, would be. In the bottom right, we can see what appears to be a pistol as well as an SMG. It's worth noting that these weapon archetypes are shared between the different classes of Javelin. However, some weapons are exclusive to a suit. A Colossus, for example, cannot use a pistol. Here's a gorgeous vista, and if we look closely, this rock formation is actually the top of a very old statue. It's worth noting that team composition is a very fluid thing. There are certain harder missions that will require a team of 4, but for the most part, you can play solo, you can play with a friend, you can play with 2 friends, and you can use any combination of Javelins you want. This Ranger is fighting what's called a Digester. This is part of the Swarm faction that we saw a lot of in the E3 2018 demo, capped off by that giant battle against the Swarm Tyrant. And here the Ranger is using their super weapon, which, much like Destiny or Overwatch, is something that charges over time, but is extremely effective. This slightly alien-looking enemy is a Scrapper and is part of the Scar faction, which we can generally assume are going to run amok, but, like us, are ultimately interested in the Anthem of Creation and in the Shaper relics. This is a pretty mysterious shot, and while this could be the titular Anthem of Creation, it could also just be the inside of a Shaper relic. We won't really know until the game comes out. Here's a Colossus fighting an Ursix. Notably, this Colossus has some aesthetic customization and has also swapped out their multi-mortar for a single mortar that might be more powerful or might do something completely different. Here we get our first look at the Interceptor's offensive capabilities with a ground pound melee. I've played the Ranger and I've played the Colossus, and when you use melee in the air with the Colossus, it does this great ground pound, so I think we're seeing something very similar, albeit much flashier, with the Interceptor. Here's an unknown agent who is part of the Sentinel faction. The Sentinels are responsible for the defense of Fort Tarsis and are therefore the guards or police force of this area. This is part of our core Javelin support team who will be traveling with us in this Strider. This is Owen, who is a Cypher, but I'll elaborate on Cyphers and Owen specifically in just a bit. There's some Sentinels as well as the agent we talked about, but I really want to point out this really stylish face covering. I don't know what that is, but I hope I can wear it. Here's a dead Javelin in a Scar camp, which looks very similar to the Scar camp that we saw at the beginning of the E3 2018 demo. We see some flight gameplay from the perspective of a storm. This pilot then lands and finds what we can only assume to be loot in the form of weapons, artifacts, or maybe even a Kodak, which is a little bit of treasure that provides some narrative context. And now the gates open into Fort Tarsis. The immediate comparison here may be Destiny's Tower, and while they certainly share some function, unlike the Tower, Fort Tarsis is completely instanced to you. You will never see another player inside of your Fort Tarsis. This is where all of your narrative happens. This is where the My Story element of Anthem takes place. And the reason why it's instanced just to you is because decisions you make here, as well as out in the world, can have rippling effects that affect your particular version of Fort Tarsis. This provides some kind of consequence for your choice, and BioWare feels this is a very important part of telling an interesting narrative. In Fort Tarsis, you'll interact with agents, such as Leighton, who is part of the Corvus faction, which is a shadowy CIA-like organization, or Yarrow, an old-school freelancer who wants to restore the image of the freelancers to its former glory. Just about every agent you interact with is associated with a faction, and they all have motives, but you can also build your relationship with all of them, and they may offer you better missions as a result. If, like me, you don't really care about the story, you can totally just skip through, take a look at the various HUD elements, pick a mission based on that, and be on your merry way. Here we get our first look at Faye. Faye is a long-standing friend of the player character, and like Owen, Faye is a Cypher. Cyphers are people who've been deeply affected by the Anthem of Creation and Shaper technology, so much so to the point where they've developed telepathic abilities. A Cypher is your man in the chair, so to speak, when you're out on a mission. They're back in the Strider, feeding you information and generally looking out for you. This is an extremely interesting shot, and while it may not look it, let me explain what I mean. These two copper statues aren't just statues of mech suits. A Javelin is a handcrafted piece of armor that is passed down from generation to generation, so they are extremely personal things. It's entirely possible that all of the citizens of Fort Tarsis are able to look at these two statues and understand exactly who is inside the Javelin and why they are historically important. This character to the right might look a little bit unassuming, but they're very important because they're you. This is the first shot of the player character that we have seen outside of a Javelin. There will be character customization in Anthem, but for now, that is just choosing between a number of preset looks. Here we see a very excited Owen, who has undoubtedly just received news that he will be able to be our Cypher for this particular mission. And here's a character we've seen a lot of. This is Halleck. Halleck was once a freelancer like us, but is no longer, and we'll get into exactly why that is just a little bit later. Here is a very intimate discussion with Faye, but unlike Mass Effect, there will be no romance in Anthem. There will, however, be relationships between characters, and just how those relationships manifest has yet to be determined. In Fort Tarsis, you'll be able to interact with a number of objects and learn more about the world and the people that inhabit it. Another reason to go back to the fort is, of course, to interact with vendors. You can modify your Javelin, personalize it aesthetically, or restock on consumables. This is a very ominous-looking shot of potentially two Sentinels, or at least two people in Javelin suits. It's entirely possible that the world of humanity located on Fort Tarsis may not be completely unified, and there might be some dissension or antagonistic forces within the ranks. Here we adorn the Colossus Javelin armor, and then use its super weapon, which is the nuke launcher. This is something that I got my hands on during E3 2018, and it was super fun and incredibly powerful to use. If you look to the upper left, we can see the health bar for the Colossus Javelin. But if you contrast that with what we saw from the Interceptor, it appears that one has a shield and one doesn't. It's possible that different Javelins have different HP structures, or maybe this is just from an older build. We can see the Colossus is providing aid to the Sentinels, so one can assume this is pretty close to home. Here's a Ranger executing an aerial dodge, which is something you can do at any time. These beams of energy are reminiscent of something you would find in a Destiny raid. The somewhat equivalent content in Anthem are called Strongholds. These are missions that require a full party with appropriate team composition and are generally challenging and replayable. We can assume that this character might be in a stronghold based upon the mission parameters, which look pretty important. Here's a Storm executing a shock ability, which in addition to dealing damage, stuns the target and sets it up for a combo from another player. Here we can see Halleck slumped over a Colossus helmet, and if we back it up, we can see a cane to his right. Now, we know Halleck has a history with the player character. We also know that Halleck blames the player character for something that happened. Based upon the panel at PAX, I think it's safe to assume that we start the game alongside Halleck, who becomes injured in some way that prevents him from once again donning the suit. Halleck is a legend in the freelancer community, and therefore taking him out of commission I think has a lot of narrative weight. It would stand to reason that Halleck could then perform the function of becoming a somewhat reluctant mentor. In this last series of shots, we can see not one, but two Ursixes. Ursixi? I don't know. And this grenade that the Ranger throws out is different to the previous frost grenades that we've seen. It's just the conventional explodey type, with maybe a little bit of electricity thrown in there for good measure. Here we can also see a health and ammo pickup. We get a very cool rapid fire ability from the Storm, and that does it. I hope you walked away from this video with a greater knowledge of that trailer than you did when you started, and if you did, why not shoot me a follow on Twitter at ThugginDuggan, THUGGNDUGGN, and subscribe to Fireteam Chat, IGN's destination for all things shared world shooters. And you can be sure that everything having to do with Anthem will be posted both there and on IGN. Until next time.